Good afternoon. Welcome to the official release of the study, Unpacking the Experiences of Young Jewish American Women in a Post-October 7th World. My name is Meredith Jacobs, and I am CEO of Jewish Women International. For those who are new to JWI, we are a 129-year-old American Jewish women's organization, originally known as B'nai B'rith Women. We work to strengthen and empower Jewish women's leadership and voice and address the real challenges women face, most notably gender-based violence and access to long-term economic security. Thousands of young Jewish women in their 20s and early 30s connect to JWI through our Young Women's Impact Networks, which are currently based in 10 cities across the country. We saw an increase in young women reaching out to us following October 7th. They were looking for a safe community where they could show up as their full selves. JWI is also the co-founder, along with Seed the Dream Foundation, of the I Believe Israeli Women global movement. So it was clear to everyone where we stood, especially when it came to fighting the denial and disinformation around the sexual atrocities of October 7th. So young women knew our networks were spaces where they could simply breathe. Among those young leaders was Sarah Milgram, who became involved in our DC network after she lost her friend group from graduate school when she accepted a job at the Embassy of Israel. After her brutal murder, I heard from several young women who said, "I didn't know Sarah, but she could have been my friend. She could have been me." We were hearing from other young women that their university's women's centers were erecting Sukkot for Gaza. One shared that her therapist told her that maybe she would feel less anxious if she was more empathetic to the people of Gaza. In fact, when JWI reached out to a domestic violence agency on the West Coast to ask for them to partner with us when we trained JCC staff to better support domestic violence survivors who are members of the organization, they said, "No, our staff supports Gaza." So we knew anecdotally that the ripple effects of October 7th, not simply the anti-Semitism, but the misogyny, were impacting women differently. Knowing that Israeli and by extension Jewish women were not receiving empathy or belief or victim worthiness, that rape was somehow being justified as resilience, that hate was coming from the right, the manosphere that hates Jews and women, and the left, who for decades have woven anti-Zionist doctrine into women's and gender studies departments, that survivors of sexual violence would be re-traumatized. These are all things, as JWI, we knew, but we wanted the research to support it. So as we did in 2021 with our needs assessment of Jewish survivors of domestic violence during COVID, we wanted the study to understand the needs so that we could build responses. I want to thank Evan and Tracy Siegel for making this study possible, to Marla Werner of Giver for her strategic guidance, and to the research team at Sharp Insight for their expertise. So here's how today will work. You will first hear a presentation of the research findings from Jana Sharp, who is the founder and principal of Sharp Insight, an evaluation firm devoted to supporting organizations in measuring and strengthening their impact. Jana has an expertise in education and public health, and her team has partnered with more than 100 organizations in the nonprofit, foundation, and public sectors. After you hear the findings, we will be joined in conversation with two exceptional young women. Julia Jassy, who is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Jewish on Campus, the leading voice for Jewish students in the United States, combating anti-Semitism, engaging in grassroots activism, and advocating for the Jewish community. Julia has advocated for students at every level, from university administrators to international news outlets to the White House as a contributor to the national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. And Noah Beer, who was the manager for the DJs at the Nova Festival. For those who have seen footage from that day, Noah is the young woman who runs on stage to stop the music. She personally saved 4 more. Since October 7th, Noah has shared her story throughout the world, including at the UN, but has since evolved into a broader conversation about what comes after trauma. Her work invites audiences to move beyond witnessing toward responsibility, connection, and the possibility of change. Following the conversation, I will share with you JWI's plans to create resources that will address the needs identified in the research. Please feel free to add questions to the chat or the Q&A box, and I will do my best to address them as we can. I want to also invite you to use the response icons. And as Jana shares findings, if you feel comfortable doing so, maybe respond with the icons to share what resonates with you or perhaps what you yourself have even experienced. So Jana, I welcome you and to the screen and to please share your report.
Thank you so much, Meredith. It's a privilege to be with JWI this afternoon and to share findings from JWI's Fall 2025 study, Unpacking the Experiences of Young Jewish American Women in a Post-October 7th World. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I will be presenting the study's objectives and methods, respondent characteristics, and key findings. So, turning to the objectives, JWI's fall study sought to understand young Jewish American women's post-October 7th experiences with anti-Semitism, impacts of anti-Semitism on their personal, academic, and professional lives, impacts on their connection with Judaism, impacts of violence against women on October 7th, along with subsequent rape denialism and campaign of disinformation, and sources of and needs for support. We developed and implemented 2 study methods in partnership with JWI that included a nationwide survey and a focus group series. Both methods took place between November and December of 2025. We received 514 completed online survey responses from a convenient sample that was recruited by JWI and their partner organizations. 15 young women also participated in one of 2 in-person focus groups that was held at JWI's Women's Leadership Conference in December in Washington, D.C. All of the participants self-identified as being a Jewish American woman, ages 20 to 34 years, and having primarily lived in the United States for at least the 2 years prior to the survey administration or focus group. In terms of who participated, I'm going to primarily share survey respondent characteristics because that was the majority of our sample, but I will also indicate where there were some differences. As you can see from this map, survey respondents resided in 35 states and the District of Columbia. The vast majority of the respondents were American citizens, with 4% reporting being American Israeli dual citizens. Among the 15 focus group participants, a very similar percentage of 93% were American citizens, and they represented 7 states. In terms of the age breakdown, you can see in the survey the average response age was 26. That ranged from 20 to 34. The average age of focus group respondents was very similar. That was 27. In terms of Jewish denomination, a range of denominations were represented, fairly in line with U.S. population reportings, with almost half of the respondents, 43%, identifying as Reform, and 1/3, 34%, as conservative. We did receive, as you can see here, also responses from modern Orthodox, Reconstructionist, Orthodox, and other denominations. among the focus group participants, we had a bit of a flip-flop with 40% identifying as conservative and 33% as reform. We asked just the survey respondents to share their background in terms of employment and their student identification over the past 2 years. And you can see that 80% reported being employed part-time and or full-time during that time period, and 48% reported being a college and or graduate student. The 2% that you see here who indicated high school being a high school student, that represented our youngest end of the sample who would currently be 20 or 21 years old. So let's dig into the findings. An initial survey item asked respondents to report the commonality of anti-Semitism in their lives, both before October 7th and after October 7th. And as you can see here on a scale from 0 to 10, the survey respondents reported an increased commonality of anti-Semitism in their lives during this 2-year period. 9 out of 10 respondents, when asked about their anti-Semitic experiences, reported at least one experience of anti-Semitism since October 7th. And the most commonly reported experiences included anti-Semitic comments, insensitive attitudes, or microaggressions at 72% of the population surveyed. 70% reported feeling unwelcome in either personal, academic, or professional settings. And 47% reported that their affiliated institution was vandalized, damaged, defaced, or Zoom bombed, cyber attacked because of anti-Semitism. And there were numerous others that are documented in the full report. With respect to negative impacts on personal lives following October 7th, 3/4 of the respondents reported negative impacts on their mental health and friendships since October 7th as a result of being a Jewish American woman. Also shown in the chart are negative impacts reported related to dating experiences, relationships with family, and relationships with romantic partners. While we studied the impacts on family and romantic partner relationships, the negative impacts on friendships were quite notable. So, as shown here, the majority shared, or 80% reported decreased contact or connection with friends due to anti-Semitism and or conflicting opinions about Israel, Zionism, and Gaza. And over these same topics, 60%, that's 6 out of 10 respondents, reported loss of friendship. In terms of romantic relationships, many reported consequences as a result of anti-Semitism and or conflicting opinions. These included 71% that reported changing what they're looking for in a dating partner. 56% reported modifying their online dating profile. 47% reported dating less. And 36% reported ending a romantic relationship or a relationship with a romantic partner. The study findings also revealed negative impacts on academic and professional lives. So we see that 68% reported a reduced sense of belonging at school. 63% reported negative impacts on relationships with classmates. 39% reported feeling pressure to minimize their Jewish identity. And nearly a third, 30%, reported negative impacts with colleagues. We also explored the impacts on connection to Judaism and Israel across a spectrum from increased connection to decreased connection. And while the majority of respondents reported increased connection to Judaism, 75%, and to Israel at 60% after October 7th, a majority also reported decreased comfort in displaying their Judaism. So that would be, for instance, wearing a Jewish necklace or clothing with words in Hebrew. On the flip side, we also saw that a smaller subset of participants decreased their connection to Judaism at 6% and to Israel at 20% after October 7th. And we saw that about one-fifth increased their comfort in displaying their Judaism. Participants were surveyed about their awareness of denialism and disinformation of sexual atrocities committed against men and women in Israel on October 7th and against the hostages. Three-quarters of respondents reported being very aware. Top reported sources of denialism and disinformation included 90% from social media influencers and online sources, 69% from mainstream media, and 42% from peers or colleagues, among others. The survey concluded with asking young Jewish American women about the supports that they desired most in this post-October 7th period. Topping the list at 45% were networking and mentorship opportunities with Jewish women leaders across industries. Other support needs reported included spaces for open dialogue and emotional processing, educational programs or workshops specifically on navigating difficult conversations and building resilience, opportunities that lead to collective action, and workplace resources. The full report includes many, many quotes from survey respondents and focus group participants. This is just a sampling of 4 quotes touching on themes of loneliness, isolation, declining mental health, and loss of relationships. I'll give you just a moment to read these over. I want to conclude with saying a thank you for the privilege of my colleagues, Sandy Saperstein, Lydia Oberholzer, and I supporting this work. And also noting that JWI's study revealed a complex and often challenging landscape for young Jewish American women living in a post-October 7th world. And while the findings highlight significant increases in reported experiences of anti-Semitism, they also underscore a profound resilience and a desire for deeper communal connection. The impact of these young women's experiences post-October 7th is far-reaching, having affected nearly every facet of the respondents' lives, including their personal relationships, their mental health, academic experiences, professional experiences, connection to Judaism, and beyond. Hopefully, this report provides JWI and the broader Jewish community with the information needed to create opportunities that meaningfully support young Jewish American women as they continue to move forward in this world. For a copy of the evaluation report, you can visit JWI's website at jwi.org. And again, thank you.
Jana, thank you. Alexis, if you could bring everyone on screen. Um, and by the way, all of you who have registered for this webinar, you will receive an email follow-up that will have a direct link to the report. I will also include the appendices. I encourage you to read it. One of the things that the Sharp Insights team noticed is that uh, it's not very frequent that people taking a survey, that survey respondents will fill out the open-ended question. And yet with this one, we had tremendous responses. I think it was just an opportunity for the women to share. So I really do encourage you to read through all of those messages. Jen, if I could ask you, what surprised you the most about the findings?
So many things. Interestingly, the unexpected thing that stood out to me was the impact on friendships, both in terms of the reported challenges with friendships, classmates, colleagues, as well as that 6 out of 10 that just have lost friendships. And I think back to when I was in my 20s, just the crucial role that friends play during that phase, and thinking about the impact of so many young women losing their close friends.
This is something that there was a reason that we also focused on young women, young professional women also. And Julia, I wonder if I can turn to you. If you could maybe share a little bit of your personal story, because I think it speaks to the findings and the history of what we're dealing with. And if you can share why you think maybe your experience and your peers' experience in the world right now is so different from, um, you know, my age group.
Totally. No, it's so great to be here. And I'm a very long time and big JWI fan. So, Meredith, always grateful for the opportunity to chat with you. My name is Julia. Like Meredith mentioned, I run an organization called Jewish on Campus, which I founded when I was a student at the University of Chicago. I've been running Jewish on Campus for 5.5 years. So, since before October 7th started, we've been doing this work. For me, what that meant was anti-Semitism is manifesting in a new way. Social media, particularly in a post-COVID world, before October 7th and the aftermath of October 7th was a major factor. COVID was because number one, the world that we lived in became more inclined toward conspiracy, and people were sitting at home and had nothing else to do but go on their phones. And social media became the place where young people went, where I spent my time. In some ways, that was important because people were able to connect when they were isolated, to be exposed to new ideas, to new perspectives that might have shaped their worldview in a time that could be very lonely. But on the flip side, it allowed for mis and disinformation to spread rapidly. For me, 5.5 years ago, when I was going into my sophomore year at the University of Chicago, or we call it second year, not sophomore year. So if there are any fellow UC alums, I'll say second year, at the University of Chicago, that looked like me for the first time in my life being scared to tell people that my family is Israeli because that would be perceived in a different way. Because the online noise, the online language, the infographics, and TikTok wasn't even as big of a thing back then, but TikTok posts now, um, have demonized my family and my community in a negative way. I had no idea how to respond. I was 19. No one knows how to respond when they're 19. And Jewish on Campus is kind of filled in that space of how do you respond? How do you react? How do you move the needle? But the reason why I was moved and compelled to do this work, and the reason why so many young women are reporting these, what feels on the outside like a shocking statistic, but what from my perspective feels very expected, is because the anti-Semitism that we're seeing spread and propagated online has become so normalized and socially acceptable that it's actually probably harder to stand against it socially than it is to stand for it.
Yeah, and we saw that come up in the findings, how many are seeing the hate online and the messages that they're getting, especially around the denialism and disinformation, are coming from influencers. Noah, you are really, you have that unique experience of being both a survivor of the Nova Festival, but also you're originally from London, and you've experienced anti-Semitism as a young woman in the diaspora. Can you kind of speak from your experience about what you're seeing and feeling?
Yes, thank you. I can connect to the deep loneliness and confusion of being a Jewish woman in places that sometimes there are people who have never met a Jewish person and have already made their ideas and made their own conclusions about who we are and what we are made of and what we do in the world. On the other hand, at the same time, there's a clarity to that for me did not exist before October 7th. I think that with the trauma and with the understanding of where the world can go if we flame hate so deeply that people hate each other so much that they are willing to take each other's lives, it has brought a clarity to me in a way that I had never had before. Because growing up, I used to watch the BBC and see what people were saying about Israel from a different perspective, and then moving to Israel and serving in the IDF and seeing who these people are and becoming one of these people. And that just made me understand so deeply that there's no us, there's no them, there's no sides to this conflict like people picture in their minds. And I think that's where the conversation needs to start, that we are human. And I think that one of the difficult things that has happened since October 7th, and I have to say this because it's really important, most of the world do not know what happened on October 7th. Most of the world have heard what has happened since October 7th and in Gaza, less what has happened in Israel on October 7th. And I've seen that inside the work I do around and surrounding Nova, seeing that people don't understand what actually happened and the reality of it. So I think the fear that we carry as Jewish people and Jewish women specifically is very understandable. But on the other hand, I would like to share from a personal perspective that my trauma is was deeply fueled by that fear because I have been spending most of my time out of Israel since October 7th. But I have found that growing from this trauma has been so much easier with conversation and with being able to speak about what happened to me, but not to specifically speak about what happened to me, but what I choose to build because of it, how I choose to see the world because of it. We it's like it's like throwing a match into a flame. If we speak words of hate, if we speak words of conflict, then we are just part of it. And if we try to take a step back, educate ourselves so that we can educate others and come together to be stronger, um, we can choose together to build something that breaks the cycle and not to continue it.
I love that. And this is actually what you just said is exactly why I wanted your voice on this, because really, I heard Dr. Mary Bar Halpern say to me once, resilience is just survival. What we're really looking at is post-traumatic growth. How do we take what we've experienced and lift not only ourselves but our communities? I want to dig a little deeper into the research. So, Julia, someone asked me, we didn't survey young men of this population. I remember reading some of the responses. One young woman said she no longer wears heels in Jewish spaces in case she needs to run. We learned that young women were changing their names on rideshare apps for fear that the driver would know that she was Jewish. I know I've experienced that being in an Uber on the way to the airport, on my way to Israel, and the driver says, "Where are you going?" And in that moment, you're like, "Ah, traveling for business," like just avoiding because it feels so vulnerable. And what I feel like these vulnerabilities really seems specific to women, not to stereotype, but that there are some things. And I'm wondering what you have heard anecdotally, especially not only among your peers, but from your work at Jewish on Campus, that does make now different for young women.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've, again, anecdotally, I guess Meredith shared similar experiences to you. I was in a cab in DC one time and the Uber driver started playing Hitler audios on TikTok and I was stuck in standstill traffic. And those are moments when you're genuinely scared. And things like that will impact somebody no matter their gender. But there are differences in how people are experiencing this moment in all moments. I think for women, similarly for LGBTQ people, the lack of home that you find in an affinity group, where a lot of people might have previously found home in the university group for women or the university group for LGBTQ people, whatever that might look like. Those places no longer became safe for them. We saw even before October 7th, women's groups that were saying that Zionists weren't allowed to join on different university campuses. And so that puts women in a very difficult spot when they want to relate to fellow women. And you want to be able to have that experience of camaraderie. And you also want to be able to live openly as a Jewish person. We also know that anti-Semitism was well as everything else, can impact people differently, and that the intersection of anti-Semitism and gender-based violence is tremendous. We see that happening, first of all, in the tremendous denial of the sexual violence and atrocities that happened on October 7th, which happened predominantly to women. And these women not only being invalidated, but also disparaged in a way that has attacked who they are, attacked their experiences, and attacked this very important virtue that we've spoken about for over a decade now of believing women, believing what they experience. So we're seeing kind of both within women's spaces, Jews feel isolated, and then also in the experience of anti-Semitism, there's this focus on appearance. There's a disproportionate attack on women in particular, which I've experienced, other women in the space have experienced, particularly, I guess, in both directions. When it comes from the alt-right, the very, very far right crowd, they don't necessarily, they're not the safest space for women to be. These kind of the neo-Nazi audience is anti-Semitic and also misogynistic. And then we see a little bit of a carte blanche from the very far left, where people think that they're above the ability of being anti-women, and yet it continues anyway when it's disparaging attacks on Jewish women. And the last thing I'll say, women are also really brave in the sense that we tend to be, because it has been hard for women to come forward with their stories over the past all of history. I think women of my age demographic have been very brave in telling their stories. I do think that there still is some hesitancy among men to come forward and tell their stories, for so many reasons that are outside the scope of this conversation. So I think we do see women coming forward more. And I mean, of course, anti-Semitism is impacting everybody. Of course, women are facing a disproportionate amount of it. But I think also encouraging men to speak out is important because it breaks the stigma that men have to always be so tough all the time.
Thank you. Noah, I'm curious if you have anything to add to that, especially kind of experiencing it as an Israeli woman. I mean, just anything you might want to add.
I think that I've had the experiences of where I'm more hesitant to say where I'm from. Easy for me because I don't carry the accent that a lot of Israelis do. But on the other hand, I have found, and I'm going to be very careful with this because it really depends. But I have found that sometimes very meaningful conversations can become from being brave enough to just say and have a conversation. And when you are not confrontational, when you come from a space of understanding who is speaking with you and then giving them the information that you have, again, on a human level, it's opened so many meaningful conversations for me. I've been traveling the world telling my story, and I have not once been on a stage where I was afraid to say that I'm an Israeli, that I served as a combat soldier in the IDF. I have always been very proud of that. Just short, like story. I once got on an Uber with a driver. His name is Mohammed, like high percentage of Uber drivers in England. And he asked me where I was going, and I was on my way to the Nova exhibition in the US. He took me to the airport, and we had such an incredible conversation about people who are put inside little squares of information of who they are just because of their name, their religion, and what they were born as. And I have to say that although I can completely connect to sometimes the fear, it also allows me to have meaningful conversations when I choose to step forward and say for a minute, I'm a human, but I'm also a Jew. So let's speak from that point of view.
Beautiful. Thank you. I think about I was in Miami for the IAC conference, the Israeli American conference, and I got an Uber to take me to the airport. And I don't know, the driver and I started talking, and I don't know how it came up, but he said something about his country, and I said, "Oh, where are you from?" And he hesitated. He said, "From a dangerous place." So I said, "Oh, where?" And then finally said, "Israel." So it turned out he was Israeli, and he proceeded to tell me about an incident he had. He said he used to play Israeli music in his car, and a couple came in and said, "Are you Israeli?" and started being so cruel to him that he pulled over and said, I'm not driving you any further." And I think they said he had to or something, the story, but it was just, you just you never know. And it's such a shame that our fear is stopping us from having those conversations that could be really lovely connections. Jen, I'm curious, like what from the research, and you know it so deeply, what feels most important to you, or what are the things that you want people to take away?
Yeah, thank you. I think above all else, the reported rise in personal anti-Semitic experiences by the young Jewish American women from before to after October 7th was really striking to me. And it felt like the most important component for Jewish communities to acknowledge, to address, to respond to collectively. In terms of, takeaways, a takeaway that really stood out is that in this new space of our post October 7th world, young Jewish American women are really needing support and community in a significant way and really in a different way than in the last maybe 2 or 3 decades. And I certainly know that JWI in conversations, with you and your team, Meredith, that you're taking these findings really to heart and using them to strategize and to plan programming accordingly. And I hope that other Jewish organizations across the country are able to really do the same. I think it's a very important group in our community. These are, our future mothers and grandmothers, and we want to do our best to really nurture and support um, in the best way we can.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And we were seeing that while there were a lot of studies on anti-Semitism happening, no one was really looking at um, young adult women. Julia, I want to pull in some questions that we're getting from the chat. I think you will be able to answer them. One said, do you have a sense of the loss of friends? Were these only, and I think I would know the answer, are these only non-Jewish friends, or were these also Jewish friends who just feel differently about Israel and Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the answer is both. I think one of the underlying trends that leads to something like this is this thing called anti-normalization. I think that's actually probably the most dire crisis the Jewish community is facing, particularly Gen Z Jews. So, what is anti-normalization? It's this very popular belief that if you have a conversation with somebody who is of an opposing viewpoint, that you normalize their viewpoint and therefore are complicit in it. So if you are having an event with a Hillel that has a birthright trip, then you are complicit in the evils of Zionism and therefore you're bad. So what that leads to is social silos, where if somebody has what is perceived as the wrong view on Israel, it doesn't lead to a conversation, it leads to social ostracization because it's viewed as an immediate taboo. So that means that there isn't a lot of understanding between why somebody has a relationship with Israel, why somebody has that experience, where someone's family comes from, what their story is. You hear this word, and it's automatically this kind of mark of wrong and bad, and people don't want to be your friend anymore. You might have a hard time being a part of a campus chapter, a campus club. I think where Jewish students and young Jews in general are having a hard time is you want conversations. We're a very inquisitive community. We're a community that likes to have a challenge. We love to debate. Like half of us are lawyers. Like this is what we do as a community. And when we're being pushed aside from those conversations, it creates a challenge. It also creates an internal challenge where people who are Jewish and might have a certain perspective therefore think that their perspective invalidates the perspectives of people who do have a connection with Israel. And I had a mentor one time who made a really great comparison, kind of to explain why somebody who might be an anti-Zionist Jew can't take Zionism away from everybody else. Think of it like Shabbat. I might not keep Shabbat every week. I love to light the candles and have dinner with my family, but I will watch a movie on a Friday night. And me not keeping Shabbat the same way that a more religious Jew might doesn't mean that Shabbat isn't a part of Judaism. Just because I don't keep it that way does not mean that I could tell somebody else that their way of keeping it isn't valid. It's the same way with Judaism, with Zionism. Somebody might not be a Zionist, but their lack thereof doesn't make Zionism not fundamental to Judaism. The same way that my movie on a Friday night does not mean that keeping Shabbat isn't fundamental to Judaism for so many people. So that's kind of where the schism is. We're seeing people generalizing, and then, that perspective is being used as proof that the Jewish community must not really need to support Israel because some people don't.
Thank you for that. I want to get to one more question from the chat and then we'll do a final question. Then I want to wrap up. Moment Magazine is on and wants to dig into the statistic around the 56% of young women who modified their dating app profile. The question is, does it correlate with feelings more connected to their Judaism or more reticent to signal their Jewishness? It is both. We have young women who reported changing their dating profiles to say they only wanted to date Jewish, they were only looking for Jewish partners. I also heard one young woman shared with me that she was on a dating app, and then within the conversation, a random watermelon emoji was used in the response, and she just at that point deleted the app. That there is a concern that you don't know the feelings either about Judaism or about Israel with your partner might feel. One quick round of for Noah and Julia. I'd love to know what you as young women would feel is missing right now. What are the supports that you need? And Noah, if you can add um, what's needed to move beyond now. So no, why don't I really just start with you on this?
Yeah. So first, I think that to move beyond, we need to we need to start not just supporting each other, but equipping each other with tools to help lead difficult conversations. I think that one of the difficult things is that you are sometimes stumped with a question that you don't know the answer to, but also don't feel comfortable enough to answer or have a conversation with someone with different views because of that fear. I think that connecting as a community and being able to give each other the support that is needed to be able to have these conversations is something that's really important to move forward. I also think that we need spaces for real conversations across difference. I think that what Julia is doing is incredible, but it also needs to come out of campuses as well. Leave the echo chambers. I love our community and I love that we are so embedded in each other and we will always have each other's backs. But I feel like the conversation needs to go out to other places and to be able to have those conversations with people who are different and we have this very internal fear of things that are different than us. That's also a lot of why people are angry with the Jews and the Zionists and all that, because I feel like there's this cycle of fearing what is different than you, and then that turning into hatred and turning that into violence and weaponizing that. It's so clear how it's so easy to move into that, and especially in our generation where everything is so instant and you can show what you believe in a moment on a post on Facebook, and then you want to feel like you belong, and sometimes misinformation. So we need spaces that connect us to our differences as well. As I said, tools for navigating conflict without dehumanization of ourselves and of others, and programs that will turn women into facilitators and not just participants. I think that is really important to be able to, again, have the tools to make a difference. I think women are the biggest force in this world. I truly believe that we are stronger than anything. And I think that we should be able to take that forward and just have meaningful connections and conversations and to be taught together how to do that.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And I fully agree with you. This is something we're doing at JWI through our, I believe, Israeli Women. We were just last month at the UN and have pulled together a coalition of activists who come from other conflict zones. And we're sharing our shared mission of ending violence against women and girls across various countries and conflict zones, but making sure that Israel and Israeli women are at the table. Um, Julia, before I wrap up, was there anything that you wanted to add to what Noah was suggesting for what's needed now?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
maybe JWI is doing.
Yeah, no, I absolutely echo what you both have said. I think it's really essential. I mean, we are a community that loves to kvetch amongst ourselves, and it's something that I definitely do all the time. But to make a real change, we're on the same page. We need to figure out how to be in conversation with others. So it's finding ways, like JOC is focused on doing, and communicating what our experiences and stories are to a non-Jewish audience to be on social media, to be in those places, speaking in the voice of Gen Z, to change people's hearts and minds, and also to understand where we do have commonality with other communities. For example, just to touch on one kind of quick anecdote, the tremendous collaborations that our student chapters have been doing with Iranian and Persian student unions over the past few months, where we see mutual stories of our communities and our histories not really being understood by all of our friends, where our histories are being told for us. How can we find commonality there? How can we come together across these experiences and almost use these hardships as vehicles for conversation. So that's a really important thing that we're able to do because we already are on the same page. We're all together on this. How can we bring others into the conversation? Yeah, I echo what you both have said, and I'm very thankful to have been a part of this panel today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I noticed that someone in the chat just offered, although the data is so heartbreaking, these gatherings give me hope and strength. And that really speaks to what JWI is looking to do. In fact, we just had a gathering on Sunday in Chicago of 90 women throughout the generations at our first Women's Leadership Conference. And just being together in that space felt so good and positive, and we want to create more of those spaces. So as we look to what supports we can offer that will move young Jewish women from positions of vulnerability to leadership, JWI is uniquely qualified to be that place of growth. We already have thousands of young women in their 20s and 30s connected to our 10 Young Women's Impact Networks nationwide. We know that providing foundations of support and friendship helps young women then go out and face hard things. So, to that end, JWI has a goal of doubling the number of networks we offer by 2030. So, a minimum of 20 networks by 2030. We are already in the major cities. We want to now focus on those cities that lack supports. We will also create circles of belonging, both in person through the networks as well as online. Smaller groups that are spaces for open dialogue and emotional processing with other Jewish women. And we hope that possibly those are spaces that can go out and connect across differences, as both Noah and Julia suggested. And for those looking to connect more deeply with their Judaism, we would also like these to be spaces of learning. We will offer relationship workshops to explore how and if feelings about Israel, Zionism, and Jewish peoplehood are deal breakers in friendships and intimate relationships, and how to think about and discuss these issues way in advance. So, this program would center the lived experiences of young Jewish women navigating love, identity, community at a time of deep polarization. The workshop would normalize the emotional complexity of caring deeply about Israel, justice, and human rights, while also wanting connection, partnership, and belonging. And this training will also include basics in Zionism and Judaism, so participants are prepared to combat common libels and myths. Learning that 90% of survey respondents shared that family are their sources of support, we will be creating workshop for parents to help them support their young adult daughters. And we will create trainings on how to show up Jewishly in the workplace, whether that's when they're applying for a job or on the job. What I don't think we shared is that I forgot the percentage, Johnny, you might remember, of our young women are actually scrubbing their resumes of Jewish experiences and are hiding and erasing their Jewish identity in the workplace. To that end, we also understand how much employee resource groups can foster safety, belonging, and inclusion for Jewish staff. So we will offer trainings to women who are in positions in their workplaces. So these are more senior women, and encourage them and share best practices for establishing Jewish resource groups for staff. We will further build out our networking opportunities for young women, connecting them with Jewish women who can provide mentorship and guidance. And finally, we will be expanding our young women's missions to Israel, taking them to the next level, creating deep and lasting relationships with young Israeli women, as well as with the dynamic Israeli women leaders and activists. These are connections built through the lens of women's leadership. This is an ambitious and audacious plan. But if we care about the future of the Jewish people, we have no choice but to support our young women. They did their part. They told us what they need. Now it's our turn to provide it. So please, this is a multi-tiered and multi-million dollar project. I need your help, everyone who's on this call, to make it happen. So if you're interested in sharing your expertise and your time, I want to hear from you. And if you're inspired to contribute, to support so that we can build out this work, please reach out. My email, and I'll put it in the chat, is mjacobs@jwi.org, or you can respond directly to the follow-up email you'll receive tomorrow. Thank you all for listening and caring. To our speakers, Noah and Julia, thank you for your voice and your work. To Jana and your team at Sharp Insights for everything you did, your expertise, your care. I will miss our regular calls and meetings. To Marla Werner for your friendship and guidance, and to Evan and Tracy Siegel for your unwavering support and championship. And in memory and honor of Sarah Milgram, thank you to all of our young leaders. Although it may not always feel like it, you're not alone. Thank you.